I don't feel like saying Happy New Year, but that's exactly what we are supposed to say as Christians to one another today. This is the first day of the new year in the Christian calendar. Last Sunday was the last day, which was Christ the King Sunday, or the Reign of Christ Sunday. And so today starts the first 4 weeks of Advent, the beginning of our Christian church calendar, when we begin to prepare to be as ready as we can for God to show up in our lives in the most unlikely places. I don't know if you can really prepare for something like that, for God to show up in the unexpected, but I suppose we could make a list of all the places that we expect to find God. Maybe in the Bible, or at church, or in religious music, maybe in the lives of holy people. But then we would perhaps make a list of the places that we don't expect to find God. In nuclear weapons, in the new tax bill, in sexual abuse scandals, in infidelity, or in grief, in shopping malls, in foreclosures, or in death. But according to our faith tradition, this is exactly what Christ's birth teaches us, that God shows up even and especially when things are awful and horrible, when and where we least expect, in ways that seem impossible to host holiness, in ways that make no sense to us. From Scripture and experience, we know that God's heart aches whenever injustices pile up. And when God's heart aches, we must tune our hearts toward that ache and not away from it. We must do more than send thoughts and prayers in order to address injustice. Heartache surrounds us these days. Ache makes a home in our hearts regarding the avalanche of sexual harassment and abuse experiences that are finally being heard in the public arena. I retweeted a post this week by a fellow UCC minister, Reverend Michelle Torrigan, and she wrote this: "Like the wall of Jericho falling after Israel marched and shouted, the wall of patriarchal systems allowing sexual harassment and assault are now falling after women have marched and shouted their stories. #MeToo, #Women's March. Ache makes a home in our hearts after each and every mass shooting, after an attack upon a mosque in Egypt that left 305 people dead in a town of only 800, after the president spreads messages of hate broadcast by white supremacist groups towards our Muslim brothers and sisters this past week. Heartache comes over us as one of the beloveds in Oklahoma City, a transgender woman, was found murdered in a hotel room last week. How much ache can our hearts handle? Are we in danger of our hearts becoming hardened to the happenings of the world? There's just too much to process. Perhaps not enough tenderness to be shared with all the crises and tragedy that occur on a daily basis. But our scripture today speaks to exactly such a time as this. The Gospel of Mark was almost likely written during or just after the disastrous Jewish revolt against the Roman imperial occupation of Palestine between 66 and 70 CE. That would have been about 40 years after Jesus' crucifixion. The people in Mark's community had experienced more heartache than they could hold as well. The government and power over the Jews, the Romans, had destroyed the sacred Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Can you imagine how we might feel if this place were to be completely demolished? Not by accident, but on purpose, because of who we are. The demolition of the Jewish temple was an even bigger event than we can imagine. It would have been as if an outside hate-filled force came into the community and destroyed and desecrated the place and the systems which distributed health care, food, wealth, learning, forgiveness, hope, and was also the location of every cultural celebration and memorial service. One scripture commentator from the Salt Collective said of this exact text, to really hear this passage, we have to listen from a position of desolation and chaos and bewilderment. We have to listen alongside the traumatized soldier, the displaced refugee, the pregnant teenager, the heartbroken addict. This is where the writer of the Gospel of Mark lives. These are the depths from which he proclaims his good news. There is a word for literature that is written during such crisis-filled times. The Greek word for this kind of literature means uncovering or revealing. And the Greek word is apocalyptos, but we call it apocalyptic. The 13th chapter, which was our text for this evening, is designated as apocalyptic literature. This means that it speaks to us about hope and victory when it seems that all has been lost. This entire chapter is a long speech from Jesus to his disciples before his betrayal. It's told in Jesus' voice, but it was preserved in written format 40 years later. And it's delivered to a community that has just lived through a heartbreaking time of trial and tribulation. Jesus says, but in those days, after that time of distress, the sun will be darkened, the moon will lose its brightness, the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers and the heavens will be shaken. Then they will see the promised one coming in the clouds with great power and glory. Then the angels will be sent to gather the chosen from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of heaven. He says, yes, distress will overpower everything around you from time to time. But do not fear, for God's love will arrive and will gather the people. Jesus then says something kind of peculiar about a fig tree. 2 chapters earlier in Mark, when he was walking with his disciples, he was hungry, and he spotted a fig tree in the distance, so he went over to gather its fruit in order to eat it. However, it was not the appropriate season for the figs to have formed quite yet, and so there's no fruit available to satisfy Jesus' hunger. He cursed the tree, and his disciples took note. But later in this apocalyptic speech, when he's speaking about a crisis time in the near future, Jesus says, he brings up that fig tree again. He says, take this fig tree as a parable, as a metaphor. As soon as its twigs grow supple and its leaves come out, then you know that summer is near. In the same way, when you see these distressing things happening, know that the promised one is near, right at the door. When a tree that has not provided food in the past begins to bud, know that your hunger pains are almost over. Know that when distress and crisis are all around you, God's presence is near, is about to provide you with nourishment and open the door and soothe your aching heart. Jesus continues, he says, be constantly on the watch. Stay awake, stay alert. The 2017 translation of this imperative from Jesus could be translated as #stay woke. According to Merriam-Webster, this slang expression, woke, might have had its transformation in a 2008 song from musical artist Erykah Badu and her song called Master Teacher. In that song she said, even though you go through struggle and strife to keep a healthy life, I stay woke. Stay woke became a watchword in parts of the Black community for those who were self-aware, questioning the dominant paradigm, and striving for something better. But stay woke became a part of the wider discussion in the United States in 2014 following the shooting death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri. Instead of just being a word that signaled awareness of injustice or racial tension, it became a word of action. Activists were woke and called on others to stay woke. So what does it mean for Jesus to say, be constantly on the watch, stay alert, stay woke in the midst of crisis and distress and destruction? When everything is going wrong and the sun is darkened and the stars are falling from the sky, we are asked to prepare for the unbelievable to happen, to take actions and steps towards peace and hope and love and joy even, to light candles while worlds crumble around us, and to prepare our hearts for the birth of God. I first learned about Angelus Arian's four-chambered heart from our first reading this evening in 2009 when I was a hospital chaplain in San Francisco. And I was learning how to journey alongside those who were in the midst of their own personal crises, with everything falling apart around them. I learned that this four-chambered heart metaphor was one way that we can promote our own spiritual and emotional health and to attend to the status of our own hearts. Angelus says that daily we should seek a full, open, clear, and strong heart. This week, as we prepare for the birth of the Christ child, we're focusing on a full heart, focusing on those places in our lives where we're not full-hearted. Where we are not full-hearted, we approach people and situations half-heartedly. In our house, we have a saying, "Don't shit on me." This should word in the dictionary, the first definition is to indicate obligation, duty, or correctness, typically when criticizing someone's actions, such as, "You really should have done this with your life," or "You should do things the way I do them." So the experience of feeling we should do something we don't want to do is the breeding ground for half-heartedness. When we feel half-hearted about things in our lives instead of full-hearted, that doesn't necessarily mean that we just need to power through it or buck up or try harder. Sometimes it means that we are living in a wrong placement and that it's time to remove ourselves from situations that we feel half-hearted about. This isn't a call to shirk or dump or ignore important responsibilities that we have, but it is a call to evaluate the places and the people and the experiences in our own lives that fill up our heart, and to designate our time and our energy and our resources in the direction of full-heartedness. So on this first day of the Christian New Year, our question is, how will you prepare your heart? Even in the midst of crisis and scandals or destruction, we are called to stay woke and trust that God will show up when and where we least expect. The sun, moon, and stars may be falling from the sky, but the fig tree is beginning to ripen. Nourishment is on the way. Am I full-hearted today? Is there something I can do about that? May it be so.